I need to do a new series called "You Can't Make This Up," right? You can't make this stuff up. Kevin, I need to find a phrase, man. Kevin Hart had the "Don't make me laugh, don't make me laugh" stuff, and I think you can't make this stuff up already exists, but you can't make this stuff up, right? You cannot make this stuff up, and so, but again, this is where if you follow this channel at all, you've heard myself and Strack for years talk about the theological versus theological gospel, right? Theological meaning you identify with being someone who believes in God, but your framework for the world is through the political lens, and theological is obviously theological, right? So I'm this is one of those things where this is why I stay balanced. This is why I cannot stand the left and I cannot stand the right. And I think they both do the same things, but they just are opposite. The left thinks that everything is racism, and the right thinks that nothing is racism. And they live to just go at each other, and the rest of us find ourselves in the middle. So let's have this conversation. Welcome to CNN. I'm Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. So you can't make this stuff up. This is what's happening on Twitter, at least as of yesterday. Let me show you this real quick. All right, conservative Ali Beth Stuckey is commenting on the curriculum that Ron DeSantis and others in Florida are trying to counteract. So they have this anti woke act of teaching about slavery and things like that and all of that. And so the curriculum essentially says that slavery was good for black people, that there were elements of it where they learned things that were beneficial for them. And here's what she commented on. I think this was yesterday. Read Florida slavery curriculum. In Genesis, Joseph was thrown into a pit and sold into slavery by his brothers. He went on to help rule Egypt, a leadership position that God used to help Israel in famine. When later his brothers sought this forgiveness, Joseph said, "As for you, you meant it evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Are we allowed to say there were benefits to his enslavement, even though his enslavement was evil? Or should this line in the Bible be condemned too? All right. Okay, she's obviously being snarky, being sarcastic. Should this line in the Bible be condemned too? And maybe not to the left, who are her political opposition, but that's her point, that there were benefits to Joseph's slavery, using what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Anthony Brian Logan, a black conservative, had this to say: slaves were not just cotton pickers and dishwashers. Many slaves were highly skilled tradesmen. They often learned these skills under slavery. This does not mean slavery was good. It's just a matter of fact. Why must we act like that's not the case? Okay. All right. So here's the thing. In the grand scheme of reality, what they're saying isn't fundamentally wrong. That there were trades and skills that slaves who may not have had those skills. And by slaves, let's be clear, they're talking about Africans that came from Africa in the transatlantic slave trade, were even though slavery was bad and they were brutally treated in many ways, that they learned skills that were beneficial. And that's what they're saying. And that the Florida law is trying to curriculum is trying to include that slaves also benefited to some degree from slavery for the skills that they present or learn. Here's the challenge for me. Ali Beth Stuckey would consider herself a believer, a conservative Christian. Here's a challenge for me, and I don't know if this is how you feel. Um, and let me just put this right here. Someone put, slaves did learn trades that they could use to earn money later and provide for their families. Okay, that's true. Okay, let's say that that's true. So here's two problems with that perspective from me. And let's be clear, that's a they're going after the left when they say that that's the African, because the left is presumably people who are black did vote left and all of those things. So even this comment, slave trade, they did benefit. That's true. But guess what though? So does indentured servitude, right? Like slave, they could have brought black people here, right? They could have said, hey, listen, we need you to work. We're hiring you to work. You're going to work these many hours. We're going to, give you after, like, even if you follow the Bible, because they were all Christians, right? These were all Christians coming over. Cotton Mather, John Cotton, these are Reformed pastors who were among the first to come over, right? They could have treated it like the year of Jubilee or stuck to the Bible and said, hey, in 7 years, we're going to release you from the slavery and give you a portion of things. Or even the year of Jubilee, all debts are canceled, right? So even if you want to say that there was a place for that to happen, it also could have happened through indentured servitude. It didn't have to happen through transatlantic chattel slavery, right? It didn't have to be just because other countries were doing that. America is the only country that presented itself as established, the colonies establishing themselves as a country founded on faith in Jesus Christ, right? So when you say that they learned skills and stuff, true, but they could have done the same thing without the chattel, without the rape, without the whipping people's back, without the Bible says true religion is to care for orphans and widows. This is what James said. These are his words. Well, slavery, in the way that America did it, where those people learned skills, they also did that by creating. They took children away from their mothers and sold them into slavery, creating orphans. They killed husbands who and created widows, right? So when we're talking about these things, one, I think there's other things that could have happened instead of chattel slavery, right? That's just one side of it. I think it's totally disingenuous and it's not really something that they really believe, I think. It's just to jab at the left. It's another way to push back against the left for all the stuff that the left has said, right? The slavery that was in America was not the slavery that was talked about in Ephesians and in Philemon and in the Bible. That slavery is called man stealing, and buying men who were stolen is sinful. It's evil. So just by default, that's there. To say that they earned some skills, to me, was essentially a way to act as if the skills that they learned were not learned under extreme duress and for fear of their lives. The psychological and physical terror that they were under, you had no choice but to learn those skills. You didn't just learn skills. If you did not learn those skills, you would die. If you did not learn those skills, they would rape your family. Or buck breaking, where they would rape the actual slaves themselves. Like, these people are talking as if it's nothing. But then that's just one side of it, right? That's just one side of it. So you're saying they learned a skill as if, like, hey, if I take a job and I learn a skill that will benefit my family. No, you learned a skill that saved your life. Because if you were not good at that skill, they had no problem killing you, feeding you to alligators in the South, allowing attack dogs to attack and kill you, hanging you from trees, whipping you. That's how you learned the skill, fam. You didn't learn it by like, all right, man, I'm not good at this, but let me just. So to me, that kind of talk is disingenuous. But here's the other side of it. And here's where I know it's not disingenuous. It's disingenuous. This argument that slaves earned trade and all of that. Why don't you say that about the Holocaust then? Okay, if you're right, they were enslaved as well. So what benefits did the Holocaust have on them? Did they learn perseverance? Was it that they learned how to be content with little and content with much, because many of them weren't eating that well, and when some of them were rescued, they looked like they were skin and bones, but they learned contentment though because they didn't have a lot to eat. Did they learn what trades did they learn over there? Did they learn how to cope with grief better because they watched their loved ones thrown into ovens and killed? Like, why don't you say the same thing about the Holocaust? Why do you always target the transatlantic slave trade that largely deals with people that were my complexion? Why do you only target that? If you're going to say that, then let's talk about the benefits of slavery for the Jews, those 6 years. Don't make the Holocaust less significant than the transatlantic slave trade. And that's my problem. Like, you're not equally balanced. You're not saying that because you don't really believe that. You're trying to antagonize the left, which is fine. But there are also black Republicans who have a problem with it. And I think that's the reality of all of this. This isn't about what's good. Don't try to quote the Bible Allie Beth Stuckey. Don't quote what Joseph said. That was a very particular thing that, and that's just describing something. Don't try to quote that and make it seem like you're saying that slavery was good. You're going after the left, and that's what you're doing. And you're trying to offend them and push back on them with a certain sort of neutral logic that is just not that's not loving at all. You tell me what fruit of the spirit is that? It's just not. Because you will not say the same thing about the Holocaust. That was slavery too, for much less, but they experienced significant trial. We treat the Holocaust like the worst thing that happened to human people, but the transatlantic slave trade is all these excuses of why it wasn't as bad as what it was. And I just think, we don't even have to do that. Like, we don't even have to make that conversation, that argument. But I appreciate that whoever this is, slavery by force is a sin. Scripture advocates against man stealing. Well, in America, we celebrated that. You let these other people steal, man, and you knew that they were being stolen, and okay. So again, for me, this is why I just don't bang with none of them in politics. I can't stand the left because they're liars, but the right are they lie as much, and they're just as self-righteous. They're all after the same thing: the opposition, the destruction of each other. They're not after, just because you're a Christian and doesn't mean that your political party is a Christian. I've never heard, as a matter of fact, this is a different video, but there's a Republican senator who stood at a prayer breakfast and talked about wanting to be there and not having sex with her fiance because she needed to be at this prayer breakfast. And there was backlash, and people are mad at the church for her saying these things, acting like premarital sex is something that Christians should be cheering on or excited about, that you wanted to come to the prayer breakfast. And those are the conservatives. I just think it just doesn't have to be said. This stuff is, but when you're going after the left, you're trying to antagonize the left. You're rejoicing at wrongdoing, and I think you're insisting on your own way. And those totally go against 1 Corinthians. So I just think this stuff is just wild to me. I don't think there were benefits there were benefits to indentured servitude and learning a skill. They're not benefits to you'll die if you don't learn this skill. We're going to rape your daughter. We're going to sell your children into slavery. That was psychological warfare, terror. It was physical warfare. I mean, there's so many things. People they treat slavery like it was just owning someone else. No, it was all the things you did to those people. Every whip for not learning that trade, they had no choice but to learn that trade. They had to survive. Some people learned that trade just so that they could try to protect their children. And you're going to quote Genesis and Joseph saying that as if that's the same thing? I just think it's disingenuous, and I just think I'm not for it. But what do I know? I'm just a dude that means nothing. So thanks for watching. I appreciate y'all. I'm actually going on sabbatical. Starting tomorrow is my last sermon until, Lord willing, September. I'm going on sabbatical, and that's the case. So I will see y'all more frequently. I want to put this last comment up because this happens a lot. Leaders of African nations were selling their own people, 100%. Here's the problem with that argument. Let me keep it up because I love when people say this. Let's talk about that. What African nation of those people claimed to be for Christ, claimed to be a country that was prided on Christ and him crucified? What nation of those African nations did that? They did not. When you claim Christ, you're held to a higher standard. So it doesn't matter if they sold their own people, even if they did, right? Look at what it says, slaves. And it's not just masters. It's not just slave. Masters are told to treat their slaves a certain way as well, right? So even if you use that, and I'm sorry, I don't know who you are, so this isn't personal, but even if you use that stupid argument that black people sold them, that doesn't matter. Even if that's true, and that is true, how you treated those slaves on the boats and when they got to America is what you're indicted for. America violated the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't matter in the Old Testament, God told them, you can take these people as captives and make them slaves. But they had to circumcise the men and treat those people a certain way. So this is a stupid argument. And I'm not saying you're stupid, whoever said it, but it's trying to dance around the issue. Even if that's true, those people weren't claiming to be represent Jesus. Sorry for spitting. And how you treat those people is what you're being evaluated by. So even if you didn't steal them, you knew they were stolen. We know the history of you giving guns and weapons and things to have them steal it. And I get it. It was a part of the slave trade that was happening and America participated. However, however, many of those nations have apologized to their African American brothers because they understood what they did was wrong. But what about what about the Christian pastors who said that slavery was biblical? What about creating the curse of Ham, right? Or Aristotle's climate theory on humanity and saying that African people are primed for slavery because they live in a warmer climate? What about that? What about teaching all these things, slaves obey your masters, not even focusing on the fact that the masters are called to treat the slaves a certain way because they have a master? What about the hypocrisy of America going to war with Britain because of the tyranny of the King of England then, but then continuing that tyranny on people in their own country? Like, if you're going to say something like that, please come with more than that for me, because I'm ready for all that type of smoke. I just think slavery was what it was. I don't think we got to live like we're in the past, but let's not pretend. Let's not try to reinvent the past and downplay the horrors of it, because I don't think the Lord is going to do that. I don't think he's going to do that at all. So I don't know how many, somebody asked this question, how many, that's not my job. You do the research. You do the research. You go look that up and reform. But here's what I will ask you. Go find out what was the denomination of people, the primary denomination of those who profess to believe in Jesus Christ. What was that when the colony started? What was that? What was the denomination? What did they believe? What did they believe? They were Reformed theologians. Pentecostalism didn't come until the late 19th century. Baptists, all of that stuff, it was, as a matter of fact, what we call the American Revolution, the King of England called it the Presbyterian War. There was a theological framework that the people who were the original colonies, the pastors that came, look up Cotton Mather, John Cotton, look up these names. You do that work and you find out how many. It doesn't matter how many, because America, a country that was prided on believing in Jesus Christ, justified the gross mistreatment of fellow image bearers. It doesn't, you just can't. And again, I know you're just asking the question. I'm responding to the questions, and I appreciate you just trying to do research. But you have to understand, America violated the second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. The black church established because as Christians were, especially after the second great awakening, the first Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards did up in Northern America, right, way up top. The second Great Awakening was when black people converted to Christianity heavy, and white people did not want them in their churches, and so they had to stay way up in the. And so it was like, all right, we're going to start our own church. And so the black church was started because white Christians did not want a fellowship with black Christians. Man, I mean, listen, I ain't even pulling out no receipts. I'm just shooting from the hip right now. And I just got too much smoke for this. I just know too much about this stuff. I wasn't even trying to make a video this long. My point is this. There are conservative Christians who are towing this line, and I think they're not doing it in love of anything but to go after the left, which I get it. That's the way we fight in America. But I think you're causing harm. And if you want black people to kind of think like, hey, conservatives have their values more than liberals do, you're not going to do that by saying this. And having a few black people like an Anthony Bryan Logan or a Candace Owens is not going to be impressive when you're trying to make it seem like that this should be something that's taught in schools as like, oh, okay, yeah, it was beneficial. You don't say that about the Holocaust. When you start saying the Holocaust is beneficial, what about human trafficking? Are you going to say that about human trafficking where people are forced into sex slavery? Are those people learning the skill of being better lovers so that when they one day get married, their spouses will benefit from all the techniques that they learned from being slaves? It's just dumb. And so let me stop here before I just say anything that's even more dumb. I got a sermon to prepare for. Love you guys. Thanks for following. Do not forget, next Friday, this drops. This drops next Friday. I'm warning you. Do not. It'll be everywhere. I don't even think you should listen to this album actually, because some of the questions, y'all, I don't even think y'all ready for this project. But if you feel like you are, this drops on Friday, August 4th. I'm warning you, do not listen to this album. Many of you should heed the warning. But if you do not, I'd be interested to hear how you process it. Appreciate you guys. I'm out of here. Thanks so much.